your consciousness. Consciousness is transcendental. It's beyond the material world. So that means if you want to perform an experiment in consciousness, the only place that you can perform it is in your own consciousness. You can't do an experiment on other people because you don't have direct access to their consciousness. You only have direct access to your consciousness. So that means you have to perform these experiments yourself, on yourself. But that's okay, because one of the things about consciousness is that it's reflexive, it's self-referential, it's recursive. It can operate on itself. That's part of the evidence that consciousness is transcendental. Because in the material world, there's always a difference between the subject and the object. But in the spiritual world, the subject and the object can be one thing, but still different at the same time. Simultaneously one and different. That's our philosophy. The technical name for our philosophy is Achintya Bhed Abheda Tattva. Bheda means the same. Abheda means different. You see? And achintya means inconceivable. So that which is both the same and different at the same time is inconceivable, because our minds, our material intelligence cannot comprehend it. But we can perform experiments that prove that this is so. Just like it's not possible for the ordinary material intelligence to understand how an electron could be both a particle and a wave at the same time. You know, we want to say, well, either it's a particle or it's a wave. Which one? Well, the answer is, it depends on how you look at it. It depends on how you measure it. It depends on the nature of the experiment that you perform. You see? If you do the Michelson-Morley dual slit experiment, you'll see photons as particles. And if you do, well, very simple Boy Scout prism experiment, you hold a prism up to the sun, then you'll see that it's actually waves. It's the same light, the same photons. But if you measure it one way, it exhibits wave-like properties. If you measure it another way, it looks like particles. The same is true of consciousness. Consciousness, if you direct it towards the material energy, it gives you one type of phenomenon called suffering. But if you direct your consciousness towards the spiritual energy, it gives you bliss, happiness, causeless enjoyment. So what do you have to do to direct your consciousness towards the spiritual energy? Simply detach it from the senses and point it at itself. That's the start anyway. Actually, the spiritual energy is unlimited. It's a whole world, a whole universe. Much, much greater and with more diversity and variety than the material universe. But in the beginning, we can't see all that because we're still blinded by this material energy, still conditioned by material senses. So the beginning of spiritual life is, at least you take a look at your own consciousness, observe your own consciousness, and you'll find this causeless flavor of joy that you can't get from anything outside. Oh, but it gets better than that. If you trace your consciousness back to its source, back to its root, you will find the Supersoul, the Lord, the origin of all consciousness. And this realization is far greater, far more profound, far more wonderful than the simple realization of the soul as being spirit. Because we find the unlimited ocean of spirit, you see? And then, if we keep going and keep going, we ultimately come face to face with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supersoul is just one of his expansions, actually kind of a minor one. And he is emanated, just like we are emanated, ultimately, by Krishna. So when we come face to face with Krishna, that's it. That's the height, that's the landmark that says, okay, we now have full realization. We now are out of this material world. We have no more need to stay in this material world. You see? So if you follow this path, if you follow these experiments, these procedures, these processes given in the esoteric teaching, this is the result. You come face to face with Krishna. We all want this. Because Krishna, the very word Krishna, means the source of all pleasure, the origin of all desirable things. So who would not want to be closely in association with the origin of all desirable things? If you don't want this, if you don't see the need for this or the desirability of this, I mean, really, you don't have much intelligence. So anyone who's actually intelligent, they want to come face to face with the source of all pleasure, the ocean of enjoyment, the origin of all bliss, all beautiful things. That's Krishna. That's why we call this path Krishna consciousness. You see? But most people have no idea what consciousness means. You mention the word consciousness and you can actually see them go unconscious. Because they have no knowledge, they have no concept of what consciousness is. It has been deliberately erased from Western material culture. Because as soon as you start investigating what is consciousness, this automatically leads to the transcendental platform of knowledge, which is beyond material life, and you start to experience this spiritual happiness that makes material enjoyment unnecessary. That's why really spiritual people can give up sense gratification. That's why really spiritual people become monks, become renunciants. It's not that we don't, or can't enjoy the same things, the sense pleasures of this material world, but we found something better. Try to understand. This is why it always blows people's minds in India when they see Western sadhus. Because they have become convinced that, oh, this material thing is so much better. Our spiritual knowledge is just a myth. Just an old story that was there, to control people or something like that. And actually this material enjoyment, that's where it's at. So they're all trying their best to, get trained up in material enjoyment so they can be like us. And then we come there and we say, no, brother, Hare Krishna. And they're like, what? You gave up all that? Yeah, we gave it up. It's nothing compared to this spiritual bliss. All I have to do is sit down and turn my consciousness inside, and I'm in the spiritual world with Krishna. So why would I want to spend all this time earning money and doing all this stuff and trying to, chase all these phantoms of material existence? It's a waste of time. Simply a waste of time. So they're always amazed when they see Westerners become devotees. When I was in ISKCON, I made it a habit, kind of like a hobby, to ask devotees about how they became devotees, because it's always an amazing story. And every single one of them, the story they told me had one thing in common, that they had some kind of mystical experience where Krishna revealed himself and showed that actually he is real. Like Ananda Vardhana was telling me his story. He actually tested Krishna. He said, come on, Krishna, if you're really there, turn out the street light. That was one of them. Yeah, and there were others, you know, but every devotee has, in a different way, everyone is unique. I never heard the same story twice. So every devotee has a unique experience where Krishna reveals himself just a little bit, just enough to let them know that he's real. And after that, it's like, oh, okay. And then they buckle down and like do the process and do it. So we see that after a couple of years of this lifestyle, one automatically becomes purified. He automatically loses the taste for these material things. And he gets more and more of a taste for spiritual things. So much so that he feels like, oh, I just want to give up this material life